Vivien Rose had always been the kind of woman who drew attention the way fire drew moths. Tall, elegant, magnetic. In New York's high society circles, her laughter alone sent gossip swirling. Men with fortunes courted her, women envied her, tabloids captured her in flashes of diamond-studded evenings. But Vivien was tired. Behind every cocktail dress and sharp smile hid a truth she couldn't shake. Everyone around her wanted Vivien the prize, not Vivien the person. When Adrien Lockach appeared in her world, he seemed like a storybook ending. Charming, assertive, drowning in wealth. The Lockach fortune spanned industries, hotels, fleets of cars, high-rise penthouses. Adrien fit perfectly into the narrative Vivien had been handed since birth. Marry the billionaire, wear the crown, cement your story and legacy. Everyone expected it. Everyone whispered it. Her friends in silk gowns and diamond chokers said, "You'll be Mrs. Lockach before the year ends." It was perfect on paper. Then there was Elijah. Elijah Cole, Adrien's personal driver. 28. Handsome in a quiet way, though no one ever noticed him beneath the cap and crisp suit. He was invisible to Adrien's circles, another employee behind the tinted glass of luxury cars. But where others looked past Vivien, Elijah looked into her. When she spoke, his gaze never drifted. When Vivien sighed in exhaustion after banquets, Elijah opened the car door gently, as though shielding her fragility from the world. At first it was nothing. Passing words. Small kindness. But small kindness in a desert of arrogance felt like rain on dry land. Vivien noticed the way Elijah would adjust the rearview mirror, not to check himself, but to glance at her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way he would turn the radio softer when she leaned her head against the leather seat. The way he never asked for her attention, yet his silence somehow demanded it more fiercely than Adrien's constant showmanship. The scandal sparked slowly like a fuse. One night, after another tedious charity gala where Adrien paraded his fortune, Vivien slipped into the backseat of the black sedan ready to collapse. Adrien was inside, chatting with guests. For the first time all evening she exhaled in peace. Then Elijah's voice, low and careful, floated back. "Rough night?" She blinked. Drivers weren't supposed to speak unless spoken to. And yet, instead of annoyance, she felt something like relief. "They all blur together," she admitted. He glanced at her in the mirror, his eyes catching hers. "Then maybe they're not worth remembering." It was the first time someone had dared cut through the charade. From that night, conversations bloomed in secretive snatches. Minutes in cars. Seconds outside penthouses. Not romance, not yet. Just whispers of humanity. Elijah shared pieces of his life she never expected. A sister back home he helped support, a love for mechanics since he was a child. In return, Vivien confessed something Adrien would never believe. Her loneliness. Her exhaustion at always playing perfect. Adrien Lockach, meanwhile, thundered forward with plans. Trips to Paris. A yacht christening in Monaco. The promise of an engagement that would send magazines into frenzy. He thought Vivien's quiet smiles were approval. He never suspected they were slipping through her fingers toward the man holding the car door open. The turning point came after a charity dinner that dragged until dawn. Vivien, dizzy and drained, leaned too heavily against Elijah's shoulder as he escorted her from the car. For a long, still moment their eyes locked. She should have stepped back. He should have dropped his gaze. But neither moved. There, in the quiet streetlight of Manhattan at 2 a.m., the current running between them could no longer be denied. From then on the game had changed. Every look lingered longer. Every brushed hand felt electric. And Vivien knew she stood at an edge. On one side lay the life everyone expected. The diamonds, the empire, the marriage to Adrien Lockach. On the other side was Elijah, her driver, the man who shouldn't even register on her world scale. And yet, her heart leaned toward him. The scandal hadn't broken yet. But Vivien felt it brewing, fiery and inevitable. Because when a woman who has everything chooses the man who is nothing in her world's eyes, the world does not forgive her. It only waits to burn. The morning after the gala, Vivien couldn't shake the memory of Elijah's steady gaze under the glow of the street lamp. She replayed it with equal measures of dread and hunger, sitting in her pristine penthouse while tabloids screamed headlines of her appearances on Adrien's arm. Future Mrs. Lockach? The upcoming billion-dollar wedding? On paper her future was set. Marries Adrien Lockach. Moves into his tallest tower. becomes the face of his dynasty while draped in couture. To her peers, it was the dream realized. But inside, the hollow ache only deepened. Adrien showered her with gifts the way men flex muscles. Boxes stamped with European labels stacked neatly by her door. Emeralds, rubies, dresses sewn with precision. All symbols of possession, not intimacy. At dinners, he boasted of their perfect match, while investors slapped his back, for whom she was just another asset folded cleanly into the Lock brand. And then there was Elijah, who said little but listened much. Who never placed things in her hands as proof of love. Who handed her something rare, simple truths she'd never been allowed to hold onto. One afternoon, after a luncheon hosted by socialites she barely liked, Vivien slipped out early. She texted Adrien a flimsy excuse: headaches, exhaustion. Instead of being tucked into bed by another maid, she asked Elijah quietly, "Can you drive me somewhere different?" He glanced at her in the mirror, cautious. "Where do you want to go, ma'am?" Vivien hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Someplace ordinary." Elijah drove out of Manhattan's slick glass belly, down into neighborhoods Adrien Lockach never would have set foot in voluntarily. They stopped at a food truck parked on a corner, smelling of grilled onions and spice. Vivien climbed out in a dress worth more than the truck itself, heels sticking slightly in the cracked pavement. People stared, unashamed, but Elijah didn't mock her discomfort. Instead, he laughed quietly. "First time standing in line for street tacos?" She tilted her head at him, amused. "Do I look that out of place?" "Yes," he said honestly. "But you also look relieved." They sat on the curb eating tacos wrapped in foil. Vivien's manicure stained with salsa. Elijah's smile soft and proud as she laughed like a woman unpracticed in freedom. "I can't remember the last time food felt like this," she admitted between bites. "Like what?" Elijah asked. "Like life itself. Not a performance." Their eyes lingered too long again. And though no words were said, Vivien felt every invisible line crack further. Time became dangerous after that. She told herself she was only indulging curiosity, that riding through Brooklyn streets with Elijah's playlist humming low wasn't betrayal, that buying a second coffee to share with him on long drives wasn't inappropriate. But her heart betrayed her logic whenever Adrien's hand rested stiffly on hers in public events. The contrast burned. Adrien's touch was ownership. Elijah's glance was acknowledgement. The first whispers arose within Adrien's circle. Her friend Corinne pulled her aside after a gala. "Darling, you must be careful. They're starting to notice how you look at your driver." Vivien's throat closed. No one notices him. Corinne leaned close, smirking. "Then why do you look terrified right now?" Vivien laughed it off, but fear gripped her harder than ever. Because Corinne was right. People were beginning to see. Adrien, oblivious, planned extravagance on extravagance. Yacht retreats. Speeches at charity dinners with Vivien shining like a crown jewel. He paraded her as a symbol of possession, never noticing the way her eyes drifted toward the man holding her car door open instead of the chandeliers above. Then, one stormy evening, everything cracked fully open. Adrien was entertaining guests in a penthouse salon, boasting loudly, sipping vintage wine. Vivien endured the performance until her chest screamed for air. She slipped out, heels clicking down marble floors, and found Elijah waiting silently at his post by the elevator. "You don't belong here," she whispered without thinking. He raised his brows slightly. "Neither do you." Her breath caught at his boldness. For a long moment they didn't move. Then the elevator doors opened and she stepped inside. He followed, pressing the lobby button. The silence between them wasn't empty, it burned. The car jolted slightly as thunder rumbled outside, lights flickering overhead. In that dim pause, Vivien's composure nearly shattered. She whispered, "Do you ever feel trapped?" Elijah's jaw flexed. "Every day I drive those streets, I feel caged between towers I'll never own. But then," he hesitated, eyes locking with hers. "Then I look in the mirror and I see you. And suddenly, I don't mind the cage as much." The words landed harder than diamonds ever could. The doors opened with a ding, reality slicing their moment apart. Vivien stepped out shakily, retreating into the night air. But her pulse raced, her veins electric with the truth. It wasn't Adrien's fortune pulling her anymore. It was Elijah, the driver she wasn't supposed to see, who anchored her beating heart. Adrien Lockach planned on announcing their engagement within weeks. He believed Vivien was his, locked in by wealth and expectation. But Vivien knew the truth now. Her heart was no longer racing toward glass towers. It was slamming against ribs every time Elijah's reflection lingered in a rearview mirror. And it terrified her more than all her scandals yet to come, because scandals hadn't even begun. High society moved like a shark tank, circling, watching, ready for a drop of blood. Vivien knew it. All her life she'd been taught the rules: smile, charm, play the role. Billionaires weren't men, they were power on two legs. You didn't fall for them, you aligned with them strategically. Adrien Lockach was the crown jewel alignment. But hearts don't follow strategy. By the third month of Adrien and Vivien's relationship, she could feel her double life fracturing. With Adrien she was poised, perfected, an accessory at galas. With Elijah, those private glances in mirrors and whispered conversations in cars grew hungrier than she could manage. And the city was beginning to whisper. The first crack appeared at Adrien's annual horse racing gala in the Hamptons. Photographers crowded, flashbulbs sizzling as couples paraded under chandeliers. Adrien played his part perfectly, hand firm on Vivien's waist as he bragged of a big announcement coming soon. The guests laughed knowingly. Behind whispered fans, bets were made. Within days, a proposal. But Vivien's heart beat erratically. When Elijah opened the car door for her arrival, their eyes met for less than a second, enough to ignite a current that nearly unsteadied her steps. Adrien didn't notice. But someone else did. Corinne again, her friend with a venomous smile, leaned close halfway through the night. "Careful, darling. Eyes linger longer than you think." Vivien stiffened. "Excuse me?" Corinne sipped champagne. "Two men can't orbit one woman without one burning out. You'd better decide which you want to burn, Vivien. Your reputation, or his." Her words rang in Vivien's ears all night. Later, as Adrien held court with investors, Vivien quietly slipped outside for air. Elijah was already there, leaning near the car, the moonlight soft across his face. "You're pale," he murmured as soon as their eyes met. Vivien's mask cracked just slightly. "I feel like I'm living inside glass, Elijah. And every step I take, I hear it cracking." For a long pause he said nothing. Then quietly, firmly, "Then let it break." Her pulse surged. Let it break. But reality came crashing back at dawn. Newspapers ran photos of her at Adrien's side under headlines like, "Lockach Air hints at engagement." Investors began calling it inevitable. Adrien moved with even more confidence, packaging her name and image into his speeches as if she were already sealed into his empire. And Vivien? She smiled for his cameras, but her smiles felt like knives slipping beneath her ribs. The scandal sparked fully one intoxicating night in Manhattan. Adrien had hosted another dinner. Lights, laughter, and ego filled the penthouse until Vivien thought she'd choke on the air. She excused herself quietly, slipping into the quiet elevator Elijah had held for her. The moment the doors shut, she sagged against the wall, breath heavy. "You need air," Elijah said, his voice calm though his hands clenched the wheel of restraint. She nodded faintly. "I need something real." The silence burned between them until it became unbearable. And then, foolishly, dangerously, Vivien stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't delicate. It was years of loneliness, months of tension, 1,000 swallowed truths exploding into one desperate act. Elijah froze only a moment before kissing her back, his hand cupping her face protectively, like she was something fragile he'd never forgive himself for breaking. When they parted, breathless, trembling, reality slammed down. "Vivien," Elijah began, guilt and hunger tangled in his voice. She shook her head desperately. "I don't care. Not right now. Just don't leave me alone in this cage." For the first time, someone saw her, not as a trophy, not as a symbol, but as a woman breaking beneath perfection. But choices like hers don't stay hidden. At the next gala, whispers grew louder. Corinne's smirk sharpened. A photograph surfaced, grainy, taken by someone outside the penthouse late that night. Elijah's hand brushing Vivien's arm as she entered the car, too intimate, too careful, impossible to dismiss. It ran the next morning on a gossip blog. Vivien Rose's odd glance at the driver's door, just courtesy or something more? Adrien barely glanced at it at breakfast. He laughed dismissively. Ridiculous what people will invent when they have nothing to do. Vivien smiled faintly, pretending to laugh with him, praying her heartbeat didn't give her away. But Elijah wasn't so naive. She saw it in his eyes every time he opened the car door. Worry, tension, fire. He knew it was only a matter of time before the fuse they had lit exploded in full. And Vivien knew something else. She wasn't terrified of the scandal. She was terrified of wanting the scandal. Because for once in her life, scandal felt like freedom. Adrien Lockach was not a stupid man. For years he had carved his way through boardrooms, tangled himself in cutthroat markets, and dismantled political rivals with a calm smile. He was blissfully egotistical, yes, but never blind. By the 4th month of his public relationship with Vivien Rose, there were things he could not deny. She was there, radiant at his side at every event, the perfect jewel to crown his empire. But she wasn't with him. Her gaze wandered in photos. Her laughter slipped into silence too quickly. The warmth that once appeared briefly when he kissed her hand in front of investors had turned brittle, rehearsed. And worse, Adrien had noticed glances he wasn't supposed to see. The way Vivien's eyes darted toward mirrors, catching the reflection of another man. The way she exhaled more easily sliding into the car than standing on his arm. The driver. Elijah. At first Adrien dismissed it. The idea was absurd beneath him. Women looked at men of Elijah's status only long enough to hand over coats. But doubt, once planted, is a poisonous weed. It grew every time Elijah held the door open too attentively, every time Vivien lingered stepping out. One evening after a tense investors' gala, Adrien found himself staring at a paparazzi photograph. In it, Vivien's hand brushed the car door as if reaching for something unseen. And Elijah, though half-shadowed by the frame, appeared angled just slightly toward her, their eyes caught mid-glance. The photograph was nothing concrete. But to Adrien's sharp, suspicious gaze, it was dangerous. He smiled bitterly to himself. "No one betrays Adrien Lockach," he muttered aloud, his voice silk in venom. Meanwhile, Vivien's war only grew louder inside her. Every time Adrien poured another diamond necklace into her hands, she felt smaller, as though being suffocated by objects that glittered but meant nothing. And every time Elijah quietly offered her an umbrella in the rain or waited in silence until she exhaled a heavy sigh, she felt larger, as if something real and alive still throbbed inside her chest. Adrien had begun hinting more loudly at a proposal. "Paris in the spring," he declared at breakfast, sipping espresso. Perfect timing for an announcement. Vivien nearly choked on her juice. "An announcement?" He smirked. "What else could I mean? The world has waited long enough for its queen." That night, in the car home, her heart pounded so violently she wrapped her arms around herself in the back seat. Elijah glanced in the mirror, reading her expression instantly. "You're scared?" he said quietly. She snapped her gaze up, startled. "What?" "You're pale, your hands are shaking. You're terrified he'll trap you in gold." Her vision blurred with sudden tears. She whispered, "What terrifies me more is that I'll let him." Elijah's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles straining. "Then don't." Their eyes locked in the reflection of the mirror, charged, desperate. And in that single glance, Vivien knew. If Adrien locked her under glass with a ring, she'd die slowly every day of her life. Elijah was the only breath she had left. The scandal crept closer. At another function, Corinne cornered her again with a sly smile. "Paris, darling? You must be thrilled. Except I can't tell if your heart beats faster when Adrien holds your hand, or when his driver opens the door." Vivien's skin crawled, her breath hitching. "Watch your tongue." Corinne smirked. "Oh, I am watching. So is the world." That night, Adrien finally voiced suspicion. As soon as they returned home, he poured whiskey violently into a glass and turned on Vivien. "You're distant." She froze. "Adrien, Don't insult me with excuses," he cut in sharply. "I built an empire on instinct, Vivien. I know when something leaks behind my walls." He stepped closer. His eyes, usually smug, were now dangerous. "Tell me, why do you smile so easily for the driver?" Her throat tightened. "Because he sees me." The words spilled out before she could stop them. Adrien's hand shook as crystal clinked against the bar. Slowly he laughed, low and menacing. "Do you mean to tell me you'd throw away everything, money, power, security, for a man who presses pedals for his living?" Vivien's eyes burned, but her voice didn't waver. Yes. Because at least he loves me, not the image of me. Silence shattered through the room like glass breaking. Adrien's face hardened, his arrogance bruised in ways even business rivals had never dared touch. He leaned in, whispering venom. Do you have any idea what this will do? To me. To you. To him. It won't be a scandal. It'll be slaughter. Try to walk away, Vivien, and I'll burn you both alive in society's eyes. She trembled, staring at him, trying to suppress the fear clawing in her throat. But behind that fear, something stronger flickered: defiance. That night, in the safety of her room, she sat on her bed, knees pulled close, replaying Adrien's threat. And yet, instead of surrender, she whispered to herself, "Then let it burn." Because Vivien Rose had realized something unshakable. Marrying Adrien Lockach would make her society's queen. But loving Elijah Cole, the driver, would make her human. And for the first time, she chose humanity over crowns. The fuse had been lit. The scandal was coming. And when it detonated, the city would never forget it. The night Adrien cornered her with venom ringing in his words broke something inside Vivien. She had played roles her whole life: perfect socialite, polished smile, poised fiancée-to-be. But standing in her bedroom afterward, trembling against the door she had shut between herself and Adrien, she knew she couldn't keep faking. If she didn't leap now, she might never get free. The next few days stretched taut as wire. Adrien's gestures turned almost aggressive in their extravagance. Dozens of roses arrived at her apartment daily, filling every vase until the scent was suffocating. A new diamond necklace glittered on her table before she ever asked for it. Adrien invited magazines to photograph them together, for the announcement, though no ring had yet touched her hand. Control disguised as romance. That was Adrien's way. Meanwhile, Elijah's restraint frayed quietly through those days. He opened doors, drove routes, said nothing, but his eyes when they flicked to hers in mirrors screamed louder than words. He wanted to protect her. He wanted to pull her away. But he knew her world could crush him with one careless rumor. Finally it happened. Adrien had arranged a press dinner in Manhattan's most extravagant restaurant. Hundreds of cameras were lined up, journalists whispering of the anticipated proposal. Vivien sat at Adrien's side in a silk dress, skin crawling under his hand that squeezed her fingers with authority, almost like shackles clamping closed. She didn't hear most of his speech. She was staring, breathless, at Elijah stationed by the car outside through the glass panes. Watching from his post, unseen by almost all, his silhouette straight, quiet, ready. Adrien reached under the table. Fingers gripping velvet, he slipped out a ring box so large even the nearest tables gasped when they caught sight. He rose to his feet, smiling that arrogant, glittering smile. "Vivien Rose," he declared loudly, knuckles white with possession. "Will you?" The world tilted. Vivien stood abruptly. The room silenced. Adrien faltered mid-sentence, thrown. Vivien's voice shook but pierced like a knife. "No." Gasps ricocheted around the dining hall. Journalists lurched forward, pens flying. Adrien blinked, laughable shock bending his practiced mask. "No." Vivien's chest thudded with fear, but she forced her voice steadier. "No, Adrien. Because this isn't love. This is theater. And I won't spend my life embalmed in glass displays for men clapping at deals. I won't marry you." The crowd erupted with whispers. Adrien's hands clenched the velvet box so tightly it nearly cracked. "Vivien," he hissed under his breath, smile brittle for cameras, "sit down. Now." But she turned away. Every camera tilted, every flash screaming as Vivien Rose, society's darling, the future Mrs. Lockach, walked out of the restaurant in front of the world. Straight toward the door. Straight toward Elijah. The moment she reached the sidewalk, Elijah's eyes widened in disbelief. For a breathless second, the entire city seemed to watch. Photographers shoved forward. Lights exploded. And then, she reached for his hand. The driver. Not the billionaire. The street detonated in chaos. She chose him. The word spread faster than fire. Adrien stormed out seconds later, face twisted with the fury of a man humiliated. "Vivien," he bellowed, voice sharp enough to slice marble. Journalists shouted questions, the wall of cameras nearly blinding. But Vivien didn't flinch. She squeezed Elijah's trembling fingers harder and lifted her chin. "This is Elijah," she said clearly, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "And yes, I chose him. Not for his money. Not for his image. But because he sees me. Because he loves me. And that's worth more than every dollar Adrien Lockach will ever hold." The street exploded into fire. Headlines gleamed before they were even printed. Society Queen chooses driver over Lockach. The scandal of the year. Love or madness? Adrien froze in the middle of it all, his empire suddenly looking like shards of glass around his feet. His jaw clenched and his voice, low but lethal, cut through the flashes. "You'll regret this, Vivien." But she didn't tremble anymore. Not with Elijah's hand holding hers in the blinding light. For Elijah it was surreal, terrifying, and intoxicating all at once. He went from invisible to infamous in a heartbeat. By the time they made it inside the car and he drove them away, the city was already screaming. But for the first time in his life, Elijah didn't care about the crowd. Because Vivien was sitting beside him, her hand still in his, tears brimming but resolve sharper than diamonds. "You've started something," Elijah murmured carefully as he hit the gas. "No," she whispered back, voice quiet but steady. "We did. And I won't hide it anymore." Behind them, Adrien Lockach's empire reeled in fury. Ahead, the tabloids sharpened their knives. The scandal had begun, roaring louder than anyone imagined. But for Vivien, with Elijah's hand locked in hers, it didn't feel like ruin. It felt like freedom ablaze. The world did not react kindly. By dawn, the newspapers screamed like banshees. Society star humiliates Lockach, driver to blame. Who is Elijah Cole? The man who stole Rose from a billionaire. Every channel buzzed with footage replayed on loop. Vivien rising from the table, her defiant "no," the shocking walkout, and the shattering moment her hand slid boldly into Elijah's. The frenzy was merciless. Socialites who once fawned over Vivien now spread poison. "She's hysterical." A gold digger lowering herself for shock value. Women draped in diamonds whispered at brunch that she had made herself untouchable. Invitations that once poured in daily evaporated within hours. She became radioactive to the same world that had once begged for her sparkle. And Adrien Lockach? He unleashed fury. His PR machine painted Vivien as unstable, insinuated Elijah had manipulated her, branding him as a servant intoxicated by proximity to power. Lawsuits appeared like storm clouds, breach of confidentiality clauses against Elijah, legal letters hinting at slander should Vivien dare speak ill of Adrien. And worse, Adrien weaponized silence. At elite dinners he didn't mention her by name, but he made sure every investor heard, disloyalty has consequences. Weak hearts don't win wars. His empire shook with vengeance. Through it all, Vivien and Elijah huddled in the small apartment Elijah rented far from the glittering towers. Gone were the champagne flutes and orchestral galas. In their place, mismatched mugs of coffee, stacks of newspapers calling them disgraceful, and the heavy silence of two people who had chosen love and were now paying the cost. Vivien sat on the floor one morning, her designer clothes replaced by sweatpants she hadn't worn in years. She clutched a newspaper that screamed, "Fallen Rose, beauty makes her worst choice yet." Her throat clawed with tears. "Elijah, maybe I made a mistake." Elijah's head jerked up from where he sat at the kitchen table. His face was weary, shadows carved under his eyes from nights of little sleep, but when he looked at her, his gaze held steady fire. "Vivien, look at me." She lifted tearful eyes. "I was your driver. I was invisible. And still, that night when you reached for me in front of the whole world, you saw me. Do you regret that?" Her lip trembled. "No. Then we didn't make a mistake. We made the only choice that mattered." She collapsed forward into his arms, shaking. Because part of her knew he was right. Love had cost them the world, but hadn't love always cost? The storms outside only grew. Paparazzi staked the street. Elijah was followed, his sister's name dragged publicly into gossip. Their apartment was hounded. Vivien couldn't walk into a grocery store without someone spitting. Adrien Lockach deserved better. And still, for every sneer, there were voices rising quietly in their defense. She chose love over money. A driver worth more than a millionaire's arrogance. Online, whispers spread that maybe Vivien wasn't mad, maybe she was brave. But whispers scared Adrien more than silence. Because whispers are seeds. He retaliated harder. Elijah received termination papers for breach of loyalty clauses. Men visited him at night, lean and dark-suited, warning him not to test Adrien Lockach's patience further. Vivien's financial resources were quietly cut. A credit line she hadn't realized Adrien's allies controlled snapped shut. For weeks, they lived like fugitives from a world they had once commanded. And yet, in those small late-night hours, love grew strange and luminous. Vivien cooked with Elijah in his modest kitchen, burning half her meals but laughing freely for the first time in years. They watched movies curled up on a couch with a tear in its cushion. She traded silk gowns for t-shirts, million-dollar chandeliers for the hum of a single dim lamp, and found herself breathing easier than she had in decades. But society wasn't letting go. One night, Adrien himself appeared at her door. Elijah stiffened instantly, his body taut, but Vivien stepped forward, refusing the safety of retreat. Adrien's eyes blazed, his smile silk over fury. "Vivien, darling. Playtime's gone too far. Come back. I'll forgive, the world will forgive, and this joke will be buried." Her hands shook but she lifted her chin. "It's not a joke, Adrien. It's love." He snarled low, the mask slipping. "You'll regret humiliating me. Him especially. Don't blame me when he pays the real price." His gaze cut at Elijah like a dagger before he turned, storming off into the night. The door slammed. Silence pulsed. Elijah exhaled slowly. He's not bluffing. People like Adrien, when pride's wounded, they'll scorch earth for revenge. Vivien wrapped her arms around him, whispering fiercely. "Then let him burn earth. I chose you. I won't crawl back." Her voice broke but her resolve did not. And in that moment, Elijah realized something incredible. This woman, once caged in chandeliers, had chosen ruin over comfort, because ruin with him was still richer than luxury with a man who never saw her soul. The scandal was far from over. The war with Adrien had only begun. But inside their small apartment, holding onto each other in the dark, Vivien and Elijah tasted something stronger than fear. Freedom. And neither of them would ever trade it back. By the 7th week of the firestorm, the scandal had vaulted far beyond New York's cocktail parties. It was no longer local gossip, it was global. Magazines in Europe printed her face beside Adrien's, branding her traitor. Paparazzi in London caught photographs of Elijah walking home with groceries, headlines mocking, "The new prince consort? In discount jeans?" In Tokyo, financial papers analyzed Adrien Lockach's empire through the lens of heartbreak, calling Vivien the woman who cost billions. The ridicule was relentless. Social feeds surged with memes. Adrien in a tux beside Vivien in his limousine contrasted savagely against grainy pictures of her holding Elijah's hand at the corner bodega. From penthouse to pavement, what a fall. But through humiliation came something Vivien hadn't expected. Support. Not from her old friends, they had vanished, sliding back into Adrien's glittering orbit, but from women she'd never met. Strangers wrote letters, messaged on social platforms, flooding her inbox with defiant praise. "You chose love over money. You did what so many of us dream of. He sees you as human, not as property. That's braver than diamonds." At first, Vivien closed her laptop, too overwhelmed. But slowly the words pierced her battered pride. She began to realize her defiance wasn't just scandal. It was a symbol. And Adrien could feel that. Which made him more dangerous. One icy evening, Adrien held a televised press conference. He stood in his tower office, skyline blazing behind him, and poured venom with a smile. "For clarity," he announced, "my engagement to Vivien Rose was never formalized. I wish her well in her personal choices. But betrayal has consequences. Those who profit from my generosity only to spit on it will not find escape for long." It was thinly veiled, but the world understood. He intended to destroy Elijah Cole. The camera swiveled. The reporters cheered. And Elijah, standing in their quiet apartment hours later, shook his head. "He won't stop until I'm crushed. He's sending lawyers. Investigators. He'll try to ruin my name, my family." Vivien's heart pounded. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but something stronger than fear rose in her chest. Her anger. "No," she whispered. "He thinks I'll run. That I'll crumble if he drags you through fire. But I won't hide anymore, Elijah. Her eyes sharpened with conviction. It's time I tell them all out loud why I chose you. The idea terrified him, but Elijah knew her spirit wouldn't easily be silenced. He cupped her face that night, murmuring, "If you take your stand, the storm will double. They'll slit deeper." Her eyes filled, but her voice held. "Then let them. Because if I endure it silently, he still wins." And so Vivien Rose stepped directly into the fire. Days later, she appeared uninvited at a society luncheon Adrien's allies hosted. The same women who had mocked her relentlessly since the scandal broke. She wore no diamonds, no shimmering gown. She entered in a simple navy dress, her chin high, every camera whipping to capture her like hawks spotting prey. Gasps rattled the room. Corinne, her once friend who turned cruelest critic, smirked. Feeling nostalgic, Vivien? Or here to beg forgiveness from the Queen's court? Vivien ignored her. She walked to the podium at the front, where no society woman was supposed to stand unannounced, and took Adrien's microphone with steady hands. Her voice, though shaking, carried through the hall. "You all laugh. You whisper. You condemn me for choosing love over an empire. For walking away from Adrien Lockach's money to hold the hand of a man you call a servant. Mock me if you must, but know this: happiness that costs your freedom is a gilded cage, not wealth. And I refuse to rot in a cage for the rest of my life." The room erupted in whispers. She pressed on, voice rising. "Elijah Cole may not own towers. He may not drown the world in diamonds. But in his eyes, I'm not an investment or a trophy. I'm Vivien. And that's worth more than anything Adrien Lockach could ever buy." The hall divided, gasps, murmurs, one or two daring claps. Reporters scrambled as security swept toward her, but Vivien handed back the microphone calmly, her pulse surging with victory. The next day, the world had its feast. Vivien Rose defends her driver. Clips of her speech flooded online. Critics still mocked, but thousands cheered. Ordinary people, far from Adrien's crown, hailed her courage. Finally, someone who sees through the lie of money equals happiness. For Adrien, it was war. He summoned her in private soon after, pulling strings to corner her at a gallery charity he sponsored. His smile was sharp as he leaned down to whisper in her ear out of earshot. "You've humiliated me twice. Do you imagine you'll still stand when I finish with you? Wealth is armies, Vivien. Armies against voices like yours. You can't win." Vivien's heart thundered, but her gaze didn't flinch. "I don't need an army, Adrien. I just need truth. And truth spreads faster than money." When she left him seething in the gallery corner, she knew the war wasn't just between Adrien and Elijah anymore. It was now between two visions of the world, arrogance gilded by wealth versus love clothed in humility. And for the first time, Adrien Lockach seemed genuinely unsettled. Because defiance from a lover is betrayal. But defiance from a symbol? That is revolution. Adrien Lockach didn't just sulk when he lost. He conquered by destruction. When whispers of Vivien's public speech spread and the tide of sympathy began shifting in her favor, Adrien realized what terrified him most. She was no longer just his ex-lover. She was a narrative, and narratives wield power. And so his retaliation turned vicious. The first attack hit Elijah. Overnight, the small auto shop his cousin had co-owned suddenly lost its permits. Notices from city inspectors piled on the door. Friends who once laughed with Elijah began avoiding him. Adrien Lockach's allies made calls in smoky restaurants, and suddenly no one wanted to be seen with the driver who stole a millionaire's crown jewel. Then threats trickled in. A tire slashed outside their modest apartment, a shadowy black car following Elijah home from a grocery run. He knew exactly whose fingerprints were on it. "This is Adrien's language," Elijah muttered grimly. Vivien's world crumbled alongside his. Once invincible accounts were frozen where Adrien had influence. Boutique owners refused her entry. Invitations disintegrated completely. What had once been her familiar stage became locked gates in her face. Still, she whispered to herself in the dark where cameras couldn't reach, "I wouldn't go back." Until Adrien's harshest strike came. A leaked story spread through glossy society columns, sources close to Lockach claiming Vivien was unstable, manipulative, even insinuating Elijah had pursued her for money. Grainy paparazzi photos of them in moments of exhaustion, Her crying into his shoulder, him holding her protectively, were captioned with venom, "Gold digger act on full display." The final line of one article nearly broke her, "She will disappear soon. Every woman who tries to leave her throne behind does." Vivien sat holding the magazine, knuckles white, trembling. "He's strangling us, Elijah. Piece by piece. He won't stop until you're ruined and me with you." Elijah, standing by the window, fists clenched, turned to her sharply. "So let him try." Her eyes widened. "You don't understand, he can destroy you. He's already started." He stepped forward, pressing his hands gently but fiercely onto her shoulders. "Vivien, I grew up knowing the world wasn't built for men like me. I learned young how easily powerful men step on us. Adrien isn't showing me anything new. But I'll say this, if I have to live small, if I have to live hunted, I'll still have something Adrien never will. I'll have you. And that matters more than 1,000 strikes." Tears streamed down her face. His voice was steady, defiant, yet it only deepened her guilt. "You shouldn't have to pay this price for me." "And what price were you paying when you smiled on Adrien's arm, trapped in his cage?" he whispered back. "This price is painful. But at least it's ours. At least it's chosen." Her chest broke open against those words. She clung to him, sobbing into his shirt, while outside cameras still prowled, waiting for fresh footage. But love couldn't stay hidden. The next week, invited by a defiant journalist sympathetic to her story, Vivien sat down for her first true interview since the scandal began. The press expected her to be broken, bitter, desperate for redemption. Instead, she appeared in a simple blouse, no diamonds, her eyes sharp as steel. "What do you say," the interviewer asked carefully, "to those who claim you threw away a kingdom for the driver of its chariots?" Vivien didn't blink. "Then they finally got something right. Yes, I did. And I'll tell you why, because kingdoms rot. They devour you, they strip everything human. Adrien Lockach's world isn't love, it's ownership. Elijah sees me, not as a throne, not as a prize. As Vivien." The silence after her words was deafening. Then camera bulbs flashed like sirens. By the following morning, her quotes dominated social media. Admiration surged louder this time. She chose dignity. "Money isn't wealth, love is." Women across the globe amplified her words. Hashtags formed. Her scandal was morphing into a movement, too powerful for Adrien to silence with money alone. Furious, Adrien doubled down, now not with threats, but open confrontation. He cornered Vivien again one night, catching her as she entered Elijah's apartment block. His suit was immaculate, his smile composed, but his eyes blazed. The paparazzi caught the confrontation instantly, and flashes lit the night like lightning. "Vivien," Adrien said through clenched teeth, loud enough for microphones. "You've embarrassed me enough. Step away from this little act before it kills you." Vivien froze, heart battering her chest. But Elijah appeared from inside, stepping between them, his frame solid despite Adrien's wealth oozing behind him. "Get away from her," Elijah growled. Adrien sneered. "A driver barking at a lion? Pathetic." Vivien's voice rose, firm and strong. "No. What's pathetic is a man so afraid of losing pride he mistakes cruelty for strength." Gasps broke out as the cameras ate it alive. Adrien's jaw twitched violently before he spun on his heel, storming away like a dethroned king. That footage hit every screen by morning. Headlines screamed, "Vivien Rose stands against Lockach." Clips of Elijah shielding her replayed endlessly. They were no longer whispered scandal. They were a symbol. It came at a cost. Elijah's job prospects shriveled completely, Vivien's fortune drained. But standing together amid the storm, they knew something priceless. Adrien Lockach had lost control of the story. And in this city, sometimes story outweighed even empires. Vivien never expected her defiance to spread like wildfire. In the beginning, it was whispers, anonymous accounts and subtle praise. But after footage of her standing tall beside Elijah against Adrien circulated worldwide, everything changed. Hashtag She Chose Love flooded timelines, posted by women in Paris, students in Brazil, factory workers in Detroit. Teenagers made videos saying, "She said yes to the driver and no to the millionaire, and I would have too." A high-profile columnist wrote in a major paper, "Whether you admire her or laugh at her, You cannot ignore the courage of a woman who spurned wealth and status in pursuit of her heart. The scandal was becoming something larger than Vivien. It wasn't about diamonds anymore. It was about the universal hunger to live honestly, and that terrified Adrien Lockach. But Vivien felt torn. Late at night, as she sat on Elijah's battered couch with global headlines blaring her name, doubt still gnawed. Elijah, what if this isn't about us anymore? What if I've become just another symbol? They don't care about me, they care about the story. And one day when they grow bored, what then? Will we still survive? Elijah poured her tea, calm in the dim light. Vivien, people may use your story for themselves. That's inevitable. But what we have is not a story, it's a life. They can mock, twist, worship all they want. At the end of the day, it's just you and me. And that's enough for me. The question is, will it be enough for you? She leaned against him, tears pricking her eyes. Yes, it was enough. But admitting it out loud felt dangerous, as if it would jinx the fragile peace. Meanwhile, Adrien struck another blow. Major magazines funded by his allies published pieces claiming Vivien was staging the entire ordeal for publicity. From socialite to tabloid queen, how Rose engineered her own scandal for stardom. Photoshopped images circulated of her in staged paparazzi scenarios, all attempting to rewrite her rebellion as desperation. But this time, it didn't work. The public pushed back. Women flooded the comment sections, tearing the narrative apart. A popular actress tweeted in support of Vivien, "Wealth doesn't equal worth. Her courage inspires me." Suddenly, supporters in positions of influence started lending credibility to the narrative Adrien couldn't crush. For the first time, his iron grip on the media weakened. Adrien, humiliated, retreated into silence, gathering his fury for some future strike. But in silence grew something else: opportunity. A television network approached Vivien directly, offering her the chance to speak her truth. It terrified her. What right did she have to talk on air like some crusader? She was just a woman who fell in love with her driver. But Elijah looked her in the eyes. "If you don't speak, Adrien will keep filling the silence for you. This is our chance. Not to glorify us, but to tell the truth before it's rewritten again." So she said yes. The live broadcast drew millions worldwide. Vivien sat under hot studio lights, wearing not a couture gown but a soft cream blouse, her hair simple. The interviewer, sharp but respectful, asked, "Vivien Rose, what?" The world looks at Adrien Lockach, power, prestige, fortune, and asks, why not choose him? Why risk everything for Elijah Cole? Vivien took a deep breath, heart rattling in her ribs. Cameras stared. Millions watched. "Because he saw me." Simple words, but the studio air thickened with silence. She went on. "All my life I was a mirror for someone else's pride. Adrien looked at me and saw victory. Investors looked at me and saw a pawn. But Elijah? He looked at me like I was human. He loved me before the scandal, before the spotlight, before the cameras. He loved me when I was tired, flawed, breaking. And once you felt that, you can't unfeel it. No fortune can replace it." The interviewer asked quietly, "And do you regret your choice?" Vivien's eyes burned as she shook her head. "Not for a second. Even if it cost me every dress, every friend, every door in this city, I would choose him again. Because life in a gilded cage is not life. Life is love." The world erupted. Clips of her words spread faster than headlines Adrien could buy. Crowds outside the studio cheered as she left hand in hand with Elijah, cameras blazing not with scorn but with awe. In their apartment that night, Vivien curled against Elijah on their worn couch, overwhelmed by the noise of the world loving and hating in equal measure. He kissed her temple gently. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head, smiling through tears. "No, we did." For the first time, she realized the scandal wasn't destroying them. It was forging them. They weren't crumbling under society's fire, they were becoming something unbreakable in it. And though Adrien Lockach still plotted in his tower, no fire he held could undo the truth that now looped on every television across continents. Vivien Rose, once society's jewel, had rejected wealth, crowns, and kingdoms. And she had chosen instead, the driver. Adrien Lockach had been quiet for too long. Too many weeks of silence while Vivien's words spread across the world, while Elijah became a folk hero for love, while society's cruel laughter began curdling into reluctant respect. And quiet in men like Adrien was never safety. It was the sound before a blade fell. The strike came sudden and merciless. One morning Elijah awoke to pounding on his door. Two men in sharp suits held papers. Lawsuits claiming theft, deceit, breach of confidentiality, charges ludicrous in scope but devastating in cost. "You leaked Locke financial information to her," the men sneered. "You manipulated her to elevate yourself. For that, you'll be stripped and prosecuted." Elijah's stomach dropped. These were manufactured accusations, but in courts fueled by Adrien's money, truth bent easily. He slammed the door shut, fury coursing through his veins. "He's trying to bury me legally now." Vivien, just behind him, grabbed the papers with trembling hands. "He's trying to bury us." Within hours, news programs had the story. Elijah Cole, driver or devil? Locke's camp alleges betrayal. Photographs of Elijah circulated with venomous captions. Strangers who had cheered yesterday now turned hesitant, confused. Support was fragile and Adrien knew it. Just one seed of doubt could poison a movement. Vivien stared at the screen, then turned to Elijah with fire in her eyes. "We fight back. We don't let him write the ending." Elijah clenched his fists, but his voice cracked with exhaustion. "Vivien, his money is endless. We'll drown in lawyers before we ever see daylight." She stepped forward, pressing her hands to his chest. "Then we drown together. I will not abandon you now. I would rather burn beside you than live untouched in his cage." Tears stung his eyes, but he nodded, because her conviction gave him strength. The following week was chaos. Court hearings loomed, journalists flooded the sidewalk. Adrien himself appeared outside a courthouse, smirking for cameras, every inch the composed conqueror. "Justice prevails," he intoned smoothly. "Loyalty has a price." His words dripped venom but landed like gospel for some. But then came Vivien. She marched onto the courthouse steps with Elijah's hand entwined in hers. Cameras flashed like thunder. And her voice, steady with truth, rang out. "He calls this justice. I call it fear. Adrien Locach is a man so terrified of love he must trample it. He calls Elijah a thief, but Adrien is the one who stole my freedom and called it devotion. He calls Elijah manipulative, but Elijah only ever held my hand in silence and gave me space to breathe. That's not betrayal, that's love. And no amount of money will erase that truth." The crowd roared. The footage spread instantly, eclipsing even Adrien's press statements. "She didn't even blink," one commentator whispered reverently. "That's not rehearsed. That's conviction." Social media caught fire again. Hashtag truth over towers, hashtag I stand with Vivien. Adrien, watching it unfold, felt something he hadn't in decades: shame. The empire of intimidation and money he'd spun his whole life was crumbling in the face of one woman who refused to back down. Still, he lashed out one final time. He sent men to her door with offers. "Take the money. Leave him. Walk away and we'll bury the lawsuits." Vivien laughed coldly, shoving the check back into their hands. "You don't understand, do you? I gave up more than money when I left him. I gave up you. And I don't want it back." The men left grim-faced. Adrien had lost not only the woman, but the war of narrative. The lawsuits dragged on, but one by one, Adrien's fabricated claims collapsed under scrutiny. Journalists who once fawned over him now dug hungrily into his corruption. Former allies, afraid of being associated with a sinking ship, pulled away. And Elijah? Though exhausted, though bruised, he stood taller every day that Vivien's hand tightened around his. One evening, after weeks of relentless storm, they returned to their apartment where candles flickered softly. Vivien sank into the couch with a weary sigh. "Do you think it's finally over?" Elijah lowered beside her, curling an arm around her. "For him? Yes. For us? Never. Because love doesn't end wars, it outlasts them." She pressed her lips to his shoulder, tears soft now, not frantic. For the first time since choosing him, she felt the seed of peace unfurl in her chest. And in that quiet, while Adrien Lockach retreated into the loneliness of his towers, Vivien Rose and Elijah Cole realized they had survived. Scandal hadn't destroyed them. Scandal had forced them to prove love in front of the whole world. And in doing so, they hadn't just sparked whispers. They had sparked a revolution. Adrien Lockach faded from headlines slowly, like an old storm whose thunder had worn itself out. His lawsuits collapsed under scrutiny. His investors peeled away, unsettled by the rotting pride behind his empire. And the man who once filled newsprint with power became a shadow staring through glass windows at towers that suddenly felt smaller, lonelier, and cold. But Vivien Rose and Elijah Cole? They did not fade. They grew. In the weeks after the courthouse speech, supporters began sending letters not just of admiration, but of solidarity. Women wrote, "I left a man who never saw me because of you." Factory workers sent photos holding handmade posters, "Love, money." Couples who had once hidden their differences in status stood hand in hand now, emboldened by a driver and a woman who chose him publicly. Vivien wept when she realized they had become more than scandal. They were proof. Proof that wealth could be defied, proof that towers could shatter, proof that love could stand even in the blinding burn of flashbulbs. Life with Elijah wasn't polished. Their apartment roof leaked after spring rains. Paparazzi still tracked their grocery runs. Finances were tighter than any of Vivien's friends could fathom. And yet, she laughed more in that cramped kitchen than she had in a decade of glitter. The food was cheap, but the company was priceless. One evening, she leaned against the window while Elijah fixed a broken chair leg, grinning at his swearing over stubborn nails. "Remember," she teased, "you used to open car doors for me in silence. Now you curse at furniture in my living room." He looked up at her, smiling sheepishly. "And you still think you traded up?" She crossed the room, bent down, and kissed him softly. Without question. Their love deepened, no longer frantic rebellion but quiet devotion. They walked through fire together. What remained now was endurance. The world could keep watching. Let them. Vivien no longer felt fear, only freedom. A year later, on a modest spring morning, Elijah surprised her. He asked her to ride with him, not in limousines this time, but in a simple rebuilt car he had been fixing for months. She climbed into the passenger seat and laughed at the rattling old engine as he drove them out of the city, past the choking towers, into open countryside where the air smelled of green. There, in a meadow dotted with wildflowers, he stopped. Vivien squinted at him suspiciously when he turned to face her instead of unpacking lunch. "Elijah Cole, what are you hiding?" He exhaled, his hand trembling slightly as he reached into his jacket. From the pocket he pulled a tiny box, scuffed, modest, nothing like Adrien's velvet cages of diamonds. Inside lay a ring, simple silver with a single stone that shone soft in sunlight. Her breath caught. "Vivien Rose," he whispered, voice hoarse, "I have no towers to my name. No billions to set before you. Only the truth you've always given me, that love is enough. I promise you honesty, laughter, fights, forgiveness, and my hand through all of it for the rest of our days. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision instantly. She laughed through them, pressing her trembling hand to her mouth. "You ridiculous man." "Yes," she whispered fiercely. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." When he slid the ring onto her finger, hands shaking, the sunlight turned brighter, the meadow louder with wind. Vivien leaned forward and kissed him hard, the kiss of a woman who had defied kingdoms and been rewarded with truth. News of their marriage spread impossibly fast. The scandal's final headline spun across the globe. She said yes, to the driver. Photographers captured her in a knee-length dress of her own choosing, Elijah in a suit bought second-hand but worn proudly. Guests weren't socialites. They were community friends, Elijah's sister, children from the library Vivien once read to. The air was filled with warmth, not wealth. And when Vivien vowed her words that day, she spoke without trembling. "I was told I ruined myself when I said no to diamonds and yes to love. But I didn't ruin my life, I saved it. Elijah Cole, you are my choice every day. And I vow to keep choosing you until this world has nothing left to take from us." Elijah smiled, tears streaking his face, and kissed her hand. "And I vow to never let your courage stand alone again. Because you weren't mine to save, you were mine to stand beside. Forever." When they kissed, the world finally shifted. Not because everyone forgave or admired, but because they no longer needed it to. The scandal that once threatened to consume them became their legend instead. A symbol that whispered across dinner tables and dorm rooms, across factories and penthouses alike. That sometimes the most radical thing a person can do is say no to power, and yes to love. Years later, Vivien would sit by the window of their small home, sunlight dancing over her wedding band as children played in the street. Elijah would lean against the sill, laughing, his hair dusted silver, his eyes still the steady anchor she had fallen for in the silence of car rides long ago. And she'd smile, heart still full. The world would remember her as the scandal, the woman who dared reject a millionaire for a driver. But she would remember herself as the woman who chose freedom, humanity, and a love money could never define. Because Vivien Rose had once sparked a scandal that shook empires. But what she truly sparked was her own life, lived honestly and lived in love.